In the early 1940s, the Pacific Ocean stretched out, vast and seemingly peaceful. Its calm blue surface reflected a quiet sun, but beneath this tranquility, two giants were watching each other from opposite ends of the world. One was ancient, disciplined, and filled with ambition. The other was immense, industrial, and utterly confident in its own power. Japan and the United States, two sleeping giants, were on a collision course, about to unleash a storm that would engulf half the globe. Japan had spent decades transforming itself from an isolated nation into a modern, formidable empire. Its naval ships now sailed far beyond its home islands, and its ambitions stretched across Asia. But this empire was hungry. Resources were scarce, and its survival depended on securing oil, steel, and rubber. In the quiet, serious corridors of Tokyo, leaders drew up audacious plans. This wasn't about rage. It was about calculated resolve. They decided to secure their future, even if it meant provoking the greatest industrial nation on Earth. Across the ocean, America watched with a cautious eye. The world was already ablaze with war in Europe, but Washington was hesitant to join another bloody conflict. Many Americans believed their oceanic distance was a natural shield. Their industries were booming, and the memory of the Great War made them wary of more fighting. But beneath this reluctance, tensions were quietly escalating. The U.S. imposed sanctions and embargoes, slowly tightening the economic noose around Japan's neck, choking its vital supply lines. Diplomacy was strained to the breaking point. A delicate dance on the edge of a cliff, while far from the public eye, naval fleets trained in silence, preparing for a war nobody wanted, but many saw as inevitable. Meanwhile, in the idyllic harbors of Hawaii, life carried on with a peaceful rhythm. For the sailors stationed at Pearl Harbor, the world's troubles felt a world away. They wrote letters home, dreaming of family and futures. Officers reviewed routine schedules, and the warm island air was filled with music, laughter, and the gentle sound of waves washing ashore. The sky over Pearl Harbor was a perfect mirror of peace. But history, indifferent to their calm, had already chosen this paradise as the stage for its next brutal act. Back in Japan's naval bases, a fleet of unprecedented power was gathering for a mission shrouded in the deepest secrecy. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, and submarines assembled like the instruments of a silent, deadly orchestra. Commanders huddled over maps of the Pacific, their fingers tracing paths to one location again and again: Pearl Harbor. For them, this wasn't an act of vengeance, but one of grim necessity. They believed they had to strike first to deliver a single, crippling blow before America's industrial might could be fully mobilized against them. The plan was breathtaking in its audacity, a surprise attack that would devastate the U.S. Pacific Fleet, buying Japan the precious time it needed to solidify its dominance over Asia. The brilliant mind behind this operation was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, a realist who had studied in America. He understood the immense power he was about to challenge. He famously warned his government, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no confidence." He knew that awakening this sleeping giant could ultimately lead to Japan's own destruction. But the decision had been made. The gears of war had begun their inexorable turn. Through the cold, rough waters of the North Pacific in late November 1941, the Japanese fleet sailed under a thick veil of mist and radio silence. The ocean itself seemed to conspire in their mission, its towering waves and gray skies concealing their advance. On board the ships, there were no cheers, no celebrations. The men were quiet, lost in their thoughts. They wrote final letters, prayed to their ancestors, and stared out at the endless gray horizon ahead. Somewhere far beyond that horizon lay Hawaii, a paradise that would soon witness a morning of fire and fury. On the night of December 6th, as the fleet neared its target, a final, futile diplomatic meeting took place in Washington, D.C. Japanese diplomats met with American officials, exchanging hollow words of peace and friendship. The timing was cruelly poetic. Even as they spoke, The very engines that would shatter that peace were being warmed up thousands of miles away. Diplomacy was fading into history just as the warplanes were roaring to life. Before the sun broke the horizon on December 7, 1941, the Japanese fleet reached its final launch position north of Oahu, in the dimly lit briefing rooms of the aircraft carriers. Pilots gathered in disciplined silence. Their eyes were fixed on detailed maps and photographs of the ships anchored in the calm waters of Pearl Harbor. Their orders were brief, precise, and final. As the first rays of light painted the decks of the carriers in a crimson glow, it felt like a symbol, a warning, and a promise all at once. The moment had arrived. In Pearl Harbor, the air was still. The island was waking slowly, its residents completely unaware that destiny was hurtling toward them from the sky. High above the ocean, hundreds of Japanese planes cut through the crisp morning air. The rising sun glinted off their metal wings, making them look almost like a great migration of birds. But these birds carried torpedoes and bombs. They carried fire. History was now just seconds away from changing forever. The Pacific, once a vast ocean of peace, was about to become a battleground of empires. The sleeping giants had stirred from their slumber, and soon the ocean itself would burn. Thank you for watching. The events of Pearl Harbor set in motion a conflict that reshaped our world. To learn more about this pivotal moment in history, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We'll see you in the next video. The world emerged from the ashes of the Second World War, battered and broken. Entire cities were nothing but skeletons of concrete, silent witnesses to humanity's greatest destruction. The war had ended, but peace was a fragile illusion. A thin layer of calm stretched over a world divided by mistrust. In the ruins of Europe, two giants now stood facing each other, each believing they alone could shape the future. The United States came out of the war as the symbol of democracy, wealth, and freedom. Its industries were intact, its economy booming, its people proud of their victory. Across the continents, the American flag became a symbol of hope, a promise of a new world built on liberty. But in the East, another vision was rising. The Soviet Union, hardened by unimaginable loss, had survived Hitler's fury and emerged as a superpower built on steel, sacrifice, and ideology. To Moscow, communism was not just a system, it was a mission to change the world. The friendship that had once united Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin began to fade like smoke after a fire. The common enemy was gone, and what remained was the fear of each other's dreams. Europe, the very heart of civilization, became a chessboard where every nation was a piece to be moved, captured, or sacrificed. From Poland to Germany, from Greece to Turkey, the lines of influence were drawn not by soldiers anymore, but by politicians, spies, and invisible pressure. In 1946, Winston Churchill stood before an American crowd and spoke words that would define the era. An iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that curtain, Eastern Europe fell under Soviet control. Its governments replaced, its people watched, its voices silenced. To the West, the world of freedom was shrinking fast. America could not stay silent. From the ashes of alliances came new ones. The Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, and the seeds of NATO were planted. But while leaders spoke of reconstruction, their scientists worked on weapons that could end all life. The atom, once used to finish the Second World War, became the new currency of power. Fear replaced diplomacy. The United States built its nuclear stockpile, and soon the Soviet Union caught up. The race had begun, a race to protect, or perhaps to destroy. Ordinary people across the world read headlines about peace, but they felt the tension. In Berlin, families found themselves divided overnight. In Eastern Europe, whispers of rebellion were crushed under iron boots. In America, the fear of communism crept into every home. Television programs, classrooms, even friendships. The Cold War wasn't just fought in boardrooms and bunkers. It lived in hearts and minds. The United Nations was born, promising peace and cooperation. But in its grand halls, every speech carried the undertone of suspicion. Every handshake between American and Soviet diplomats was staged for the camera's gestures without trust. The world had two suns now, each trying to outshine the other. And somewhere between them, smaller nations were being pulled apart. To choose the West was to risk the wrath of the East. To lean toward the Soviets was to lose the favor of the Americans. The map of the world began to shift in quiet ways. New governments, secret deals, hidden funding. The Cold War was not a single conflict. It was 1,000 invisible wars fought in silence. By the end of the 1940s, the world had changed forever. The weapons of yesterday were no longer enough. Power was now measured in influence, secrets, and ideology. Soldiers no longer charged with rifles. They worked in embassies, laboratories, and intelligence offices. A new kind of soldier had emerged: the spy, the scientist, the strategist. And yet, through all the tension, one thing remained clear. The war was not over. It had only changed its face. The ghost of World War II still haunted the world in the ruins of Berlin, in the corridors of Washington, and in the guarded towers of Moscow. The guns were silent, but the fear was alive. This was not peace. This was preparation, a silence heavy with the promise of conflict. The world had survived one apocalypse, only to walk into the shadow of another. The Cold War had begun. Their first major offensive step was aimed at a small, jungle-clad island that most of the world had never heard of, Guadalcanal. When the 1st Marine Division stormed the beaches on August 7th, they expected a swift, decisive battle. They were young, confident, and ready to take the fight to the enemy. What they found instead was a waking nightmare. A 6-month-long ordeal of torrential rain, gnawing hunger, and the constant gut-wrenching tension of endless watchfulness. The jungle wasn't just a backdrop. It was a living, breathing adversary. It was thick and suffocating, buzzing with insects. And it hid unseen dangers within every shadow, every rustle of a palm leaf. The enemy was a ghost. Imperial Japanese forces, masters of jungle warfare, moved with a terrifying silence. They were unseen, but always felt, their presence a constant pressure on the Marines' minds. The island itself seemed to join the fight, determined to break the invaders. It unleashed biblical storms that turned the ground into a sea of mud, swallowing men and equipment. The heat was a physical blow, burning like fire by day. And when night fell, the darkness wasn't a comfort. It was a humming, oppressive void filled with the sounds of the jungle and the ever-present fear of an attack. Supplies, which had been hastily unloaded, quickly ran thin. The Navy, locked in a series of brutal sea battles offshore, struggled to reinforce the beleaguered Marines. Rations were cut, then cut again. Men were soon surviving on captured Japanese rice and whatever they could forage. Malnutrition and tropical diseases like malaria and dysentery became as deadly as enemy bullets. This wasn't the clean, heroic war they had imagined. This was a primal struggle for survival. The Japanese, for their part, were determined to throw the Americans back into the sea. They saw the landing as an intolerable intrusion and launched wave after wave of furious counterattacks. Elite soldiers, fueled by a fierce code of honor, charged into the American lines with bayonets fixed, their battle cries echoing through the humid nights. The fighting was savage, often hand-to-hand. Clashes like the Battle of the Tenarue River and the fight for Henderson Field turned the muddy soil a darker shade of red. Every victory was paid for with staggering exhaustion and profound grief. The battle for Bloody Ridge, a desperate defense of the crucial airfield, became legendary. Here, A few thousand Marines held off a force more than twice their size in some of the most intense fighting of the entire Pacific War. Yet, somehow, the American line held. It bent, it frayed, but it did not break. And in those quiet, humid moments between battles, when the relentless rain softened the distant sound of gunfire, soldiers on both sides shared the same raw human thought: survival. The war on Guadalcanal had transcended grand strategy. It was no longer about national pride or imperial power. It was about enduring the impossible, one day at a time. The Pacific had become a living storm, testing the limits of every man's physical strength and mental sanity. As the months dragged on from autumn into winter, the island's name grew heavier, laden with the weight of sacrifice. The once dominant Imperial Japanese Navy, which had ruled the Pacific since Pearl Harbor, began to falter. The waters around Guadalcanal, nicknamed Iron Batom Sound, became a graveyard for warships from both sides. But Japan's losses were becoming unsustainable. Their supply lines, stretched to the breaking point, began to snap. Fuel for their ships and planes dwindled. On the island, their soldiers were starving. The indomitable spirit of the Japanese fighting man began to bend under the crushing weight of attrition. Finally, by February 1943, the impossible happened. The Empire of the Rising Sun, for the first time in its modern history, was forced into a large-scale retreat. Under the cover of darkness, the remaining Japanese troops were evacuated. Guadalcanal was no longer theirs. It belonged to the Allies. And with it came more than just a piece of land. It brought a new momentum, a new belief that victory was possible. From the brutal lessons learned at Guadalcanal, a new strategy was born: the island-hopping campaign. Instead of launching costly frontal assaults on every fortified Japanese stronghold, the Allies would leapfrog across the Pacific. They would select key islands, bypass others, and seize them to build airbases. By doing this, they could cut off and isolate major Japanese garrisons, leaving them to wither on the vine, cut off from supplies and reinforcements, like stones left behind by a receding tide. Each captured island became a new stepping stone, a new forward base, bringing Allied forces ever closer to the ultimate target: Japan itself. This strategy was brilliant, but it was not bloodless. Every leap across the ocean came at a terrible cost. The names of tiny atolls and volcanic islands would soon be seared into history, echoing as places where unimaginable courage met pure chaos. Tarawa, with its beaches stained red. Saipan, where civilians were caught in the crossfire. Peleliu, a fortress of caves and tunnels that became a meat grinder. The Pacific Ocean was no longer just a vast distance between nations. It had become a sprawling, deadly field of struggle, stretching toward a horizon that was still shrouded in smoke and flame. By the end of 1943, the strategic picture had been redrawn. The Allies had reclaimed much of the Pacific. The Japanese Empire, once a vast and seemingly unshakable force, now found itself on the defensive, surrounded by its own silence as island after island fell. Yet, in Tokyo, the will to fight had not died. The military leadership refused to acknowledge the possibility of defeat. The spirit of the samurai, the code of Bushido, still breathed in every soldier who wore the rising sun on his sleeve. They would defend their homeland to the last man. And so, as the sea around the Solomon Islands calmed for a brief moment, a grim understanding settled over everyone involved. The victory at Guadalcanal was not the end. It was, as Churchill might have said, the end of the beginning. The greatest, most violent storms of the Pacific War were still to come. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this look into the Pacific War meaningful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories from history. We'll see you next time. By late 1943, the vast Pacific Ocean had become a deadly chessboard, a theater of strategy, sacrifice, and unrelenting will. The hard-won victories at Guadalcanal and in the Solomon Islands had shifted the tide of war. But the ocean was far from quiet. A new, more brutal chapter was about to begin. From the shadowy decks of aircraft carriers to the silent, smoke-filled halls of command rooms, both the Allies and the Japanese Empire were steeling themselves for a longer, harder storm. For the Americans, the path forward was clear but perilous. Admiral Chester Nimitz and General Douglas MacArthur, the two titans of the Pacific Command, knew that every island taken was not just a piece of land. It was a crucial stepping stone, a rung on the ladder leading to the very heart of Japan. They called this strategy island hopping, but this was no game of leapfrog. Each leap meant thousands of men stepping into the unknown, onto shores where pristine coral sands hid nests of steel and concrete, and where the beautiful horizon promised both glory and a sudden, violent end. The Japanese, though battered and bruised, were far from broken. Their spirit remained unyielding. Across the immense expanse of the Pacific, they had been busy, transforming key islands into formidable fortresses. Places like Tarawa, Saipan, and the naval stronghold of Truk were no longer just tropical paradises. They were now walls of fire, meticulously designed to bleed the American advance dry and halt it in its tracks. For the Japanese soldier, surrender was not an option. It was a concept alien to their code of honor. Every man was trained to fight until the sea itself claimed him, or until his last breath ran dry. The stage was set for a series of clashes that would redefine the meaning of warfare. The first test of this new phase came in November 1943, with the battle for the tiny atoll of Tarawa. As the sun rose on that fateful morning, it glinted off coral reefs that shimmered like broken glass. But beneath that tropical beauty lay a deadly trap. The initial naval bombardment, meant to obliterate the Japanese defenses, proved tragically ineffective. As the landing craft approached, they were shredded by hidden artillery. The American Marines were forced to disembark hundreds of yards from shore, wading through waist-deep, churning water, their boots sinking into the sand as enemy machine guns opened up from cleverly concealed bunkers. The ocean, once calm and blue, turned into a chaotic hellscape of red-tinged waves, the roar of battle mingling with the cries of the wounded and the dying. For 3 endless, brutal days, the island of Betio, the main objective in the atoll, burned with the relentless sound of gunfire and the acrid smoke of explosions. It was a fight of inches, not miles. Marines fought with rifles, grenades, and flamethrowers, rooting out defenders from tunnels and pillboxes in desperate close-quarters combat. When the guns finally fell silent and the American flag was raised, victory had been secured. But it came at a cost so staggering, so horrific, that it silenced the cheers and sent a shockwave through the American public. Over 1,000 Marines had been killed, with thousands more wounded. Tarawa was a victory, yes, but it was also a grim lesson in the true price of island hopping. Learning from the bloody ordeal at Tarawa, the Allies refined their tactics and pushed westward, their sights set on the Mariana Islands. In June of 1944, the assault on Saipan began. This wasn't just another island. This was a battle that would decide the fate of Japan's empire in the Pacific. Saipan's dramatic cliffs stood high and proud, guarding an island that held immense strategic value. Its capture would place the Japanese home islands squarely within the range of America's new long-range bomber, the B-29 superfortress. For Japan, losing Saipan was unthinkable. It was a dagger pointed at the nation's throat. When the American forces landed, they were met with a storm of fire so fierce, so fanatical, it seemed as though the very earth itself was fighting back. The Japanese defenders, nearly 30,000 strong, fought with a suicidal determination that stunned even the most battle-hardened Marines. The fighting was savage, progressing inch by agonizing inch through dense jungle, cane fields, and rugged volcanic terrain. Days bled into nights that never seemed to end, filled with the constant threat of terrifying nighttime banzai charges. After 3 weeks of brutal combat, the island was declared secure. The fall of Saipan sent thunderous shockwaves through Tokyo, the highest levels of the imperial command were thrown into panic. For the first time, Japan's war leaders could feel the cold shadow of defeat creeping over them. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo and his entire cabinet were forced to resign, but their response was not surrender. It was a doubling down on defiance. Orders were immediately dispatched for every remaining ship, every plane, and every pilot to prepare for a final, decisive battle, a battle to the death. The era of the kamikaze was about to dawn. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, General MacArthur was preparing to fulfill his famous, solemn promise, "I shall return." In the occupied Philippines, these words were more than just a vow from a distant general. They were a lifeline, a beacon of hope for a population that had endured years of brutal occupation and had never stopped fighting. The ocean between MacArthur and the Philippines was teeming with danger, but the world watched and waited. Everyone knew that the moment MacArthur's feet touched Philippine soil once more, history would shift on its axis. And so, as the summer of 1944 drew to a close, a new, even darker storm was gathering on the horizon. The skies over Japan were beginning to darken, not with clouds, but with the heavy, ominous weight of what was to come. New weapons, new tactics, and new, unimagined horrors were being forged in the crucible of war. The Pacific was no longer just a battlefield. It was becoming the very forge of a new, terrifying age of conflict. The waves rolled on, indifferent and eternal, carrying both the desperate hopes of millions and the chilling fear of the unknown toward the shores of destiny. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this chapter of history as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the pivotal moments that shaped our world. We'll see you in the next one. As 1945 dawned, the vast Pacific Ocean was a silent testament to the brutal years of war. For the Allied forces, this immense watery expanse was the final road home, a path leading directly to the heart of the Japanese Empire. The strategy, known as island hopping, was simple in concept but brutal in execution. Conquer key islands, one by one, creating a chain of air bases that would bring their bombers ever closer to Tokyo. Each island was a stepping stone, a hard-won piece of land paid for with grit, sweat, and the lives of brave men. The island of Iwo Jima was one such stone, a mere speck of volcanic rock covered in black ash. It seemed insignificant from a distance, but up close, it was a fortress. The Japanese had transformed it into a deadly labyrinth with miles of hidden tunnels, reinforced concrete bunkers, and a spiderweb of caves. To the Americans, Iwo Jima was the gateway to Japan's home islands, a crucial airfield for their B-29 bombers. To the Japanese defenders, it was sacred soil to be protected at all costs. The assault began with a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. For days, an armada of Allied warships pounded the island with relentless artillery fire. The air grew thick with smoke and the salty spray of the sea, creating a suffocating haze. But when the Marines finally stormed the beaches, they discovered the true nature of their foe. The Japanese soldiers, emerging from their underground network, were disciplined, determined, and prepared to fight to the last man. The battle descended into a brutal, close-quarters struggle through smoke-filled tunnels and shadowy ravines. It was a fight for every inch of ground. For weeks, the island was a living hell of constant gunfire and explosions. Yet amidst this chaos, a single moment of profound symbolism emerged. One morning, through the dust and haze of battle, 6 soldiers fought their way to the top of Mount Suribachi, the island's highest point. There, they raised the American flag. The image, captured by photographer Joe Rosenthal, became an instant icon, a powerful symbol of courage and resilience that transcended the despair of war. It was a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. But even with the fall of Iwo Jima, the war's ferocity only intensified. The next target was Okinawa, the largest and final stepping stone before the planned invasion of Japan itself. This battle would become the bloodiest of the entire Pacific campaign. Okinawa was a beautiful island with lush green fields and serene villages. But soon, this paradise was engulfed by the storm of war. The American fleet formed an iron wall around the island, while the skies above became a terrifying new battlefield. This was where the world witnessed the full, terrifying might of the kamikaze. Japanese pilots, in a final act of desperation, turned their own aircraft into guided missiles, hurling themselves at the American ships. The sky was filled with a macabre fireworks display as planes exploded into fireballs, their brief, bright lights flickering over the churning ocean. On the ground, the fighting was just as savage. The civilian population of Okinawa was caught in the crossfire, their homes turned to ash, their families scattered. It was a war of sheer survival, where victory was measured in yards gained and lives lost. When the smoke finally cleared, Okinawa was a landscape of scars and silence. The fields were cratered, the villages gone, but the island itself endured beneath the quiet gaze of the setting sun. The cost had been immense for both sides. For the American military planners, the brutal defense of Okinawa sent a chilling message. If the Japanese fought this fiercely for a distant island, how would they defend their own homeland? The prospect was horrifying. New calculations were made, invasion plans were drawn, and the estimated casualties were staggering numbers so high they were almost incomprehensible. It was in these grim discussions, in the cold, hard logic of military strategy, that a new world-altering word began to be spoken. Atomic. The war had reached a terrible crossroads, and the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, the reality of the situation was setting in. The once mighty Japanese Navy was a shadow of its former self, its great battleships now resting at the bottom of the ocean. On the home front, the Japanese people faced severe rationing, nightly blackouts, and a growing sense of dread. The nation held its breath, waiting for an end that remained undefined: victory, peace, or something far more devastating. The Pacific, once a stage for grand naval battles, had become a mirror reflecting the extremes of human nature or capacity for incredible bravery and unimaginable destruction. Each island captured, each life lost, was a story in itself, a chapter in a much larger, tragic epic. The waves seemed to roll onto the shores with a tired sigh, as if mourning the countless souls they had witnessed fall. As the Allied fleet regrouped and turned its compass north towards the shores of Japan, there was no triumphant celebration. There was only a quiet, somber understanding. The end was near. The final terrible chapter of the Second World War was about to be written, and it would be written in fire. Thank you for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you next time. In 1945, a strange quiet fell over the Pacific. The American fleet, a colossal metal city, stretched across the ocean from the Philippines to the shores of Iwo Jima. The rising sun was fading, but Japan itself remained defiant, a nation bracing for a final, desperate stand on its own soil. But the next assault wouldn't come from the sea. It came from the sky. From newly conquered islands, a new kind of storm gathered not of clouds, but of wings. Thousands of American bombers, their engines a constant, menacing hum, took to the air. The strategy was brutal and direct: break Japan's will to fight. Turn its war machine to ash, and do it before a single soldier had to set foot on the mainland. Night after night, the cities below shimmered, unsuspecting. Then the fire began. Swarms of B-29s descended upon Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe. The darkness erupted into a terrifying, man-made dawn. It wasn't just explosions. It was a deluge of fire. Incendiary bombs rained down, turning wooden houses into a sea of flame that leaped across rivers and rooftops. Fanned by the wind into a raging inferno. From the ground, people looked up at a sky painted in horrifying shades of orange and gold. It felt as if the stars themselves had fallen, bringing hell with them. This wasn't just the destruction of cities. It was the immolation of an entire era. In command centers thousands of miles away, American generals watched reconnaissance photos of the burning cities. They spoke in the cold language of tonnage, targets, and statistics. But in the quiet moments, they felt the immense weight of the fire they had unleashed. The bomber crews, returning to base, their planes still warm from the heat of the infernos below, wrote in their logs. The sky looked like day. Yet, for all the devastation, Japan did not surrender. The emperor's voice, though not heard directly, echoed through official broadcasts, urging his people to endure, to resist, to protect the sacred homeland. In the dim light of candles, factory workers forged on. School children practiced with bamboo spears. A powerful belief persisted in the hearts of millions. The spirit of Japan, the Yamato de Mache, could never be broken by fire or force. By June of 1945, the war had reached its final, bloody chapter. Okinawa had fallen after a horrific battle, and the Allies were finalizing their plans for the invasion of Japan itself. Operation Downfall. The predictions were apocalyptic. Planners estimated casualties in the millions for both sides. It would be a prolonged, grinding war of attrition that could drag on for another year, turning the entire country into rubble. But in Washington, a different conversation was happening behind closed doors. Scientists and military leaders spoke of a new kind of weapon forged in the utmost secrecy in the deserts of New Mexico. A weapon that could end the war not with a drawn-out invasion, but with a single, terrifying flash. This wasn't the fire of napalm or conventional bombs. This was the fire of the atom itself, a power capable of turning light into the ultimate weapon. Across the Pacific, at a hidden airbase on Tinian Island, the pilots chosen for this mission trained in complete silence, unaware of the true nature of the payload they would carry. They were the best of the best, flying a specially modified B-29 bomber, its silver frame polished to a mirror shine. Its name was the Enola Gay. Then came August. The summer air over Japan was thick, heavy, and still. On the morning of August 6th, as the sun began to rise, the Enola Gay lifted off from Tinian. Its crew moved with a practiced, mechanical calm, a quiet rhythm of checklists and instrument verification. Each man a cog in the turning wheel of history. Below them, a nation slept, unaware that it was living through its final moments of peace. The target was a city, a center of military and industrial importance, Hiroshima. At 8:15 in the morning, high above the city, a single bomb fell, and then the world changed forever. A light brighter than 1,000 suns erupted in the sky. It was a silent, blinding flash that bleached the world of color and painted permanent shadows onto walls and pavement. For a single eternal heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. The sky had been ripped open. The age of atomic fire had truly begun. Days later, on August 9th, a second light, a second storm, struck the city of Nagasaki. Japan, a proud nation of warriors, poets, and dreamers, now stood at the very precipice of annihilation. The unspeakable destruction from these two weapons finally broke what the firebombing raids could not: the spirit of resistance. The emperor, a figure considered divine and who had never been heard by his subjects, did the unthinkable. He spoke to his people directly over the radio. His voice, trembling with the weight of his nation's fate, crackled through every home. He announced the unendurable surrender. The war situation, he said, has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. With those words, centuries of military tradition, of honor and defiance dissolved. The fire from the sky hadn't just destroyed cities, it had shattered the myth that war could ever lead to glory. Across the Pacific, on ships and islands, the American soldiers, sailors, and Marines who had fought their way from one bloody shore to the next paused. There were cheers, yes, but for many, there was only a profound, silent relief. The war that had begun for them in fire at Pearl Harbor had now ended in fire. But this didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion, like the end of a long nightmare, an emptiness that no medal or parade could ever fill. As the planes returned home for the last time, their silver wings reflecting the setting sun, the vast Pacific Ocean stretched out below them, finally calm. The waves carried only whispers now, echoes of all that had been lost. The fire had fallen from the sky, and the world would never, ever be the same. Thank you so much for watching. This is a heavy but important part of our shared history. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. See you next time. Summer 1945. The world was teetering on a knife's edge, caught between the elation of victory and the horror of annihilation. The vast Pacific, once a roaring battlefield, had fallen into an eerie quiet. Its waves no longer carried the sounds of war, but the silent wreckage of fleets and the ghosts of a conflict that had consumed entire nations. Japan, the once proud empire, was now a specter of its former self. Its cities were scarred landscapes, its people were hollowed by exhaustion, and its spirit was stretched to the breaking point. Night after night, American bombers sliced through the darkness. They carried more than just bombs. They carried the weight of a terrifying new question. How far could destruction go before it consumed the destroyer? Below, the islands that once echoed with the clash of steel now lay shrouded in ash and whispers. Tokyo was a city of embers, its streets glowing like veins of molten ore after relentless firebombing. In the haunting silence that followed each raid, only the wind dared to speak, carrying the cries of a nation forced to confront the true meaning of defeat. Yet, even amidst the ruins, there were those who still bowed before the emperor's portrait, their lips moving in silent prayer for a miracle they knew would never come. Then a new dawn broke, one that would irrevocably alter the course of history. In the secret heart of American science, a power beyond imagination had been unleashed, a weapon forged from the very fabric of the universe. When this new power fell upon a Japanese city, the sky did not thunder, screamed. The light was not the warm glow of the sun. It was a blinding, all-consuming flash that did not illuminate, but erased. In an instant, houses vanished, mountains trembled. And it seemed as if the sun itself had crashed to earth. A profound, unnatural stillness fell. The ocean's winds died down, and the entire Pacific seemed to hold its breath. Days later, another city met the same apocalyptic fate. This wasn't a conventional invasion. There were no invading armies, no blockading fleets. There was only a single plane, a single silent fall, and the deafening silence that followed. The message was brutally, undeniably clear. The age of conventional warfare had reached its terrifying climax. Humanity had unlocked a power it could never put back in the box. In hidden rooms and fortified bunkers, Japan's leaders gathered. Their faces were etched with despair, their hands trembling as they weighed the unbearable choice of surrender. Some argued for a final, honorable stand, to die with swords in hand, to fall with their empire. But others, looking into the abyss, saw a different kind of truth. They understood that honor was meaningless if there was no nation left to uphold it. On a quiet morning in August, an unprecedented sound echoed across the islands. For the first time in history, the people of Japan heard the voice of their emperor. It was not the voice of a thunderous god, but of a man, gentle and almost broken. He spoke of an end to the conflict, of accepting the unacceptable. "We must endure the unendurable," he said. With those words, a war that had begun in a blaze of fire and ambition finally ended in a whisper of surrender. The Pacific, once a canvas of fury and naval power, grew calm. American ships anchored in the very waters where great battles had been fought, their flags waving not in triumphant arrogance, but in a kind of somber disbelief. Soldiers stood on the decks, staring at the same horizon that had once been filled with enemy fleets. Now it was peaceful, almost sacred, but this new peace was heavy. The victory, secured at the cost of millions of lives, left a haunting question hanging in the air. Had humanity truly won, or had it merely survived? In the skeletal ruins of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a fragile, defiant life began to stir. Flowers pushed their way through the irradiated dust. Children, unaware of the profound shadow that now stretched over their world, played in the rubble. In quiet offices, scientists scribbled new equations, while generals penned their memoirs, each trying to make sense of what had happened. Under the soft glow of the setting sun, the Pacific whispered its stories, tales of immense courage, profound sacrifice, and devastating consequence. History would call it the end of World War II, but for those who had witnessed the fire fall from the sky, it was not an ending. It was a warning. The ocean had fallen silent, yes, but within that silence, the echoes of humanity's greatest and most terrible test would reverberate forever. And so, the age of empires faded, giving way to an age of reflection. The Pacific slept, once more vast, endless, and forever scarred by memory. This was the final breath of a war that changed everything, and the first, uncertain whisper of a new dawn. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. We'll see you next time.